Hey there, it's Lara back with your horoscopes for the Sagittarius full moon on June 14th, 2022, and the whole waning half of the lunar cycle. Welcome. Thanks for being here. If this is your first time to my channel, I hope you stick around. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you can get notified when I put these videos out, which are always on Wednesdays. And I try to do a video every single Wednesday. I always do the horoscope videos, no matter what. And in between those, I try to do shorter astro nuggets where we take a specific topic or question and I give you some astrological insight. So I try to get those done in between these horoscope videos. It doesn't always happen. Life's kind of crazy these days. But you can check out the videos that I have on things like Mercury retrograde and the big three in astrology. I'll leave the links to those below. So let's get talking about this full moon in Sagittarius that's happening on June 14th, 2022. So the horoscopes in this video go June 14th to the 27th of June. And then we will have the next set of horoscopes out for the waning half of the next lunar cycle, which begins with a new moon in Cancer on June 28th. But right now we're talking about the full moon in Sag. That takes place at 7:51 a.m. and that's Eastern time, so you can adjust for your time zone. And it's at 23 degrees, 25 minutes of Sagittarius, which is a mutable fire sign. Like all full moons, at the time of this full moon, we have the sun and the moon sitting opposite each other in the sky. So we will have the moon in Sagittarius and the sun across the sky in Sagittarius's opposite sign of Gemini. And when we have a full moon, the moon is actually fully reflecting the light of the sun. And so we associate full moons with things like illuminations, when things are blossoming, reaching a culmination point, coming to some sort of an ending or a natural close, perhaps a turning point, a bearing of fruit, some kind of manifestation of whatever was initiated by you or by the universe at the previous new moon a couple of weeks ago. In this case, that was a new moon in Gemini on June 2nd. But also, moreover, when we have a full moon, we look back to the new moon in that same sign that happened 6 months prior. And we get an idea of what was initiated then that is now reaching maybe a larger turning point or a major sort of cathartic moment, that kind of thing. So in this case, that happened to be a new moon in Sagittarius that was an eclipse. And it was the last eclipse in that Gemini Sagittarius eclipse cycle that we are now out of. But the thing is, you know, there are cycles upon cycles and everything overlaps, right? So this is really sort of like the true ending to that eclipse cycle that began in at the end of 2020. So that Gemini Sagittarius eclipse cycle that began at the end of 2020, it was June 2020, is the final sort of moment where things are wrapping up. You know, we're tying up all the loose ends. The final pieces are falling into place. The release of whatever that storyline, the final release of whatever that storyline has been about for us is happening at this full moon. So that's something to keep in mind, definitely. We will have, so this is not what I want to say is this isn't an eclipse, obviously, because the eclipses are now out of Gemini Sagittarius and into Taurus and Scorpio, right? And we've talked about that in previous videos because we've just come through an eclipse portion of the year where we had 2 back-to-back eclipses in Taurus and Scorpio. And if you haven't watched the videos for those yet, I encourage you to do so because that storyline is going to be playing out for another sort of year and a half. So those horoscopes are still relevant. But in terms of this particular full moon, you know, it's not an eclipse, but it's still a full moon. And it is, as I said, some sort of a wrapping up of those eclipse events on the Sag-Gemini axis. So whatever this culmination is, it can feel a little bit less intense than sort of the initiation of the story or certain points along that story arc of the Gemini Sagittarius eclipse cycle. But the culmination is in the Sagittarius area of your chart, right? So everybody has Sagittarius somewhere in their chart. It occupies a specific whole sign house in your chart, and I use whole sign houses. And that whatever themes that house speaks to, that's where the culminations are happening. That's where the bearing of fruit, the endings, the catharsis, the illumination, the coming to light, the turning points are happening. And we're going to talk about that when we get to the horoscope for all 12 signs. And if you're not sure, I want to just pause briefly to mention this. If you're not sure what I'm talking about when I'm talking about houses, you don't know what your birth chart looks like, or you've messed around online and tried to figure out how to get your own chart, but you're not quite sure if you did the right thing, then you can go have a look on my website, which is astrologymaven.com, and the link to that is always below. And I have a course on offer there, which is a 3-part video course that walks you through not only my favorite place to go get your birth chart online for free, but so it shows you a step-by-step how to do that and to make sure that it's accurate, because it can be a little bit confusing when you don't know what you're doing and you go to one of these free sites and it's asking you for, all these different options and you don't really know what to put in. So I walk you through all of that, but more than that, this class also touches on the history of astrology and birth charts. Why would you want a birth chart in the first place? What can you do with it? What do you do if you don't know your birth time? And there's a bunch of other stuff that I cover there. So if that's something that sounds interesting to you, definitely go have a look. It's an on-demand course. So as soon as you purchase it, and I have it priced at, I think it's like $47 or something Canadian, and you get it right away. You get access to it right away. And there's PDF downloads with it as well. So, okay, moving on from there. Let's talk more about this full moon. So we know that the full moon is happening in Sagittarius. We know it's a culmination, an ending, a release, all of those full moon things, those words that we use when we talk about full moons. But there are some other things happening in relation, right, to the full moon. First of all, at the time of this full moon on June 14th, we will have Mercury, Venus, Saturn, and Mars all in the signs that they rule. So all in what we call domicile. They're all at home, in other words. So those planets are all feeling rather strong at the moment of this full moon. And they'll all be in their home signs until on June 22nd, Venus will move off into Gemini. But during this period, at least some things might feel a little bit more like we don't have to work so hard because the planets are at home. They're in comfortable surroundings. They have everything they need around them to do their job and to make them comfortable. You can think of it as how it feels when you're in your own home, right? And you know how things work. You know where everything is. You have your things around you. You have access to the tools that you need, all of that. And so when the planets are in their home signs, they are operating optimally because they don't have to struggle to get the job done. So that's good news. That's one thing that's happening at the time of this full moon. The other things going on are that, first off, Mercury will have just entered Gemini, which is the sign it rules, the day before the full moon. So it will be at 0 degrees of Gemini. And this is, as I was saying, the other part of this lunation, because we'll have the sun in Gemini as the moon is across the sky in Sagittarius. And that Gemini-Sag axis is where we had our previous eclipse cycle. So it feels like, when we had the Gemini Sagittarius eclipses, it was the North Node, right? That was in Gemini. So it feels like this is sort of like the final chapter or the epilogue in that eclipse story that was on the Gemini Sag axis. And there's some information that we are gathering here with Mercury in its home sign of Gemini, where the North Node was during that previous eclipse cycle. Some information that's coming in to sort of show us the direction that we need to go next. So we have that to keep in mind. And the other thing, of course, we have to think about, who is the ruler? What planet rules this particular lunation, right? Well, the full moon's in Sagittarius. The ruler of Sagittarius is Jupiter. Where's Jupiter at the time of this full moon? Well, Jupiter is in Aries. And this is the first lunation with Jupiter in Aries. And the thing about this is it's an unencumbered Jupiter that we see here, meaning it's not making any aspect. There's no difficult aspects. There's no aspects going on to Jupiter. So Jupiter's kind of just, free to do its thing in Aries there. So there's not a lot of constraints on Jupiter or difficult tight corners for Jupiter to get out of at this lunation. And we do have a couple of other things that are going on, but before I get to those and the horoscopes, I just want to take a minute to talk a little bit about Sagittarius, since we're on the topic of Jupiter rules Sagittarius. What else can we say about the sign of Sagittarius? Well, Sag is a mutable fire sign, and it's the last of the 3 fire signs, right? So Aries and Leo being the first 2, the other 2. Sagittarius is the last fire sign. It is mutable fire. So when we're thinking about like a visual for this, to get a flavor of what Sagittarius, mutable fire is like, you can think about a forest fire, which is sort of unpredictable in nature, right? It has that mutable quality. It can change direction based on the wind. Things can ebb and flow based on how dry or wet it is. So you can think of it like that. And you can also think of it like the spark of initiation that calls us to sort of chase a vision, right? Aries is cardinal fire. It's the initial spark. But with Sagittarius, the spark has been lit and we're being, drawn in a particular direction. We are inspired in a particular direction to chase a certain vision. So those are ways you can kind of visualize or get a feel for mutable fire. Some key words in terms of Sagittarius are things like honesty, bluntness, being like jovial or good-humored, right? Funny, restless, magnanimous is a good word for Sagittarius. Sagittarius can be charming. Sagittarius is very freedom-loving. And I mean that in terms of like, Sag likes to be kind of like, sometimes we think of Aquarius as being like the, the freedom-loving kind of hippie. And actually, in some ways, Sagittarius is more that energy than Aquarius is. Aquarius is a fixed sign ruled by Saturn. Sagittarius is a mutable sign ruled by Jupiter, right? So it's freedom-loving. Sag can be prone to excess. Jupiter can go over the top, right? Sagittarius can be opinionated. And we have to remember that opinions don't always have facts behind them, right? So sometimes there can be this sense of Sagittarius, they are so kind of strong in their convictions, like they know certain things and they don't really necessarily always need the facts to back them up. So they can feel like their opinion is the truth. And so there's this sort of sense of like Sagittarius knows what it knows and it doesn't like to be challenged on that necessarily. Other words for Sag: the explorer, right? The philosopher, the seeker. Sagittarius can be bold, sometimes arrogant, sometimes reckless. Um, a good motto for Sagittarius is "Go big or go home." Right? We get that Jupiterian sense of growth and optimism and abundance kind of thing. The actual key phrase for Sag is "I see." So when we consider that, Sagittarius is the sign of is symbolized by the arrow, by the centaur shooting the arrow, right? Towards the horizon. I see the horizon. I see the truth. I see the possibilities. I see the big picture. These are all Sagittarius things. So as I was saying, Sag is the centaur, half human, half horse. It rules the hips, the thighs, the liver, the lumbar region of the spine. And that half man, half animal, sort of half man, half horse, shooting the arrow towards the horizon, towards, where it, like being called to the adventure sort of thing. It symbolizes like the wisdom of our instincts, that animal nature that we all have, and the call to adventure. It's the part in all of us that is wise and knowing and adventurous. It is the quest that we're called to participate in. Sagittarius looks towards the horizon with optimism and confidence, like this is where I'm going kind of thing. And then there's always, like I alluded to when I was talking about some of those keywords, there can be a little bit of going over the top, a bit of debauchery and that sort of thing. If you know anything about the mythology of the centaurs, well, the centaurs like to, they like to have a good time. So that is Sagittarius. It's this kind of, it's our animal instincts and our intellect all rolled into one. So that's a bit about Sagittarius. Some other things that are happening at the time of this full moon are that the sun and the moon are in a square to Neptune, and almost an exact square, because as I was saying, the full moon is at 23 degrees, 25 minutes of Sag, and Neptune is at 25 Pisces. So it's a very close configuration here. And then we also have Saturn, who happens to be at 25 degrees Aquarius, and it is in a sextile to the moon and a trine to the sun. So Neptune in this square, a square is a conversation of tension. It's a little bit of a tight spot. It can cause some friction that we need to work through, some difficulty. But then Saturn is in a sextile and a trine, right, to the full moon. So this is more helpful energy from Saturn, which is always nice when we're talking about Saturn. So all together, this combination of what's happening at the time of this full moon speaks to something culminating, something coming to fruition or completion in the Sagittarius area of life, some kind of an adventure, a learning initiative or experience, a quest, some kind of expansion that's been going on, maybe something involving travel or faraway places, something involving philosophy, ideology, wisdom, big T, truth, your truth kind of thing. And whatever this is, may have had or have some confusion, deception. These are the Neptunian pieces, Neptunian square. Confusion, deception, martyrdom, escapism, these kinds of things attached to it. Or it could involve some sort of sleight of hand, right? I think of that phrase when I think of Neptune. So it could even involve things like theater, movies, sort of, the arts, television, these kinds of creative or artistic sort of endeavors, right, are Neptunian in nature. So there may be something surrounding those kinds of themes going on that is a bit uncomfortable or tricky to navigate because of that square. And then because of the trine going on between Saturn, like I said, Saturn's in a sextile to the moon and trine to the sun. Whatever this is going on going on in Sagittarius at the time of this full moon, or the Sagittarius-Gemini axis, it may also require some sort of adulting or hard work or ambition, strife, self-sacrifice, challenge, obstacles, boundaries, patience, all these Saturnian words, right? Practical effort. But it's like, because it's, again, in a trine and a sextile to the full moon, it suggests that Saturn is approving in some way of the effort that we've made. And it's sort of willing to dole out the karma, right? Or the rewards accordingly. That's the way it works with Saturn. If you do the work, you reap the rewards. And the rewards don't always necessarily feel like something like we're going to throw a big celebration about, or like we've won the lottery, because we've worked for it. So it's almost like that sense of accomplishment of a job well done when Saturn rewards you for the hard work and the efforts that you've made, right? So it can feel more like sort of that kind of a culmination that's going on. We also have to remember that full moons are often, not only are they often emotional, because it's like the moon is illuminating something that is normally dark, or it's at the brightest point. It's bringing things up from the depths, just as the moon, I like to say it, just as the moon pulls on the tides, it sort of pulls on our internal tides, right? And our emotions. So our emotions can bubble up to the surface at the time of a full moon. And it can also be relational in nature. Oftentimes at full moons, we have some sort of relationship dynamics going on. And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean with a significant other, it doesn't have to be somebody you're married to. It can just be, we're in relationship all the time with people and with ourselves, right? But so there can be a relational aspect to a full moon often. So that's a good thing to keep in mind as well. Now, as I was saying, the Sagittarius-Gemini axis is where the eclipses were between early 2020, so June, I think it was June of 2020, and the end of 2021, which kind of brought us into the early part of 2022, really. So if you think about what was happening around there, this Sagittarius lunation likely has something to do with that. It's likely related to that in some way. And those people that have placements, if you have significant placements, say between around like the 19 and 27 degree point of the mutable signs, specifically Sagittarius and Gemini, but also Virgo and Pisces, then this full moon will likely feel a little bit more personal for you. It is playing out for all of us in some way, shape, or form, but depending on how close it is to placements in your chart, right? How personal it is for you. Like, it'll either be you experiencing it personally, or if it's not really touching something in your chart, then it may just be you might be something minor, or you're witnessing these kinds of things play out on a larger scale around you, right? And the people around you, or in the world at large, kind of thing. So, just before I launch into going through all 12 signs, I'll sort of wrap up everything that I was saying and remind you that the confusion or the nebulousness, that's a good word for Neptune, those things that I related to Neptune will be the challenge, right? That's the thing that's going to require the bandwidth, sort of. And that is in the Pisces area of your chart. So if you know your chart, you can look to the house that Pisces occupies and the themes that that speaks to. And then the structure, the maturity, the responsibility, the patience, the rewards for the hard work will tend to be in the Aquarius area, right? That'll sort of come from or be related to the Aquarius area of your chart and whatever house themes that speaks to. But the culmination of all of this will be felt in the Sagittarius house, and on the Sagittarius-Gemini axis, but it will specifically sort of manifest in the Sagittarius house. So what I'm going to do when I go through the horoscopes is I'll speak to that axis in general. I'll tell you, where does Sagittarius sit in your chart based on rising sign? So these are rising sign horoscopes. If you know your rising sign, listen for that first and foremost. But you can also listen to them as they were sun sign horoscopes as well. If you don't know your rising sign, that will still give you information. It just won't align specifically with your birth chart. But you'll still get information if you listen for your sun sign and your moon sign as well. Particularly if you have a night chart. So if you're somebody that was born at night, then the moon sign tends to resonate more. And if you're somebody that was born during the day, you may feel that the sun sign resonates more. But in any case, the rising sign is going to be the most accurate for you. So, the Sagittarius area of your chart, the Sagittarius house based on rising sign, will be where this culminates, right? So we're going to speak to the Sag-Gemini axis in general. All right, let's dive in here. And we're going to start in this case with Sagittarius because Sagittarius, this is your full moon. And that's the way I like to do things. And I will put timestamps. So if they're not up right away as you're listening, then definitely just, sit tight. And the timestamps will be there so you can come back and click on them. It'll make it easier for you. Okay, so let's begin with Sagittarius. Sagittarius rising, Sagittarius sun or moon, if you're listening for that. This full moon is culminating in your first house as a Sag rising. So for you, Sag, you've gone through that eclipse cycle that is now technically over, right? The Sag-Gemini eclipse cycle, and that we were speaking about in the intro. But this is sort of the last notch, where it's like the last piece falls into place. The last piece of information, the last event or whatever it is wrapping up now for you in relation to that eclipse story. So you can think about what was that about in your own life, right? And you'll probably notice that there's something transpiring or culminating now that is related to that. And in any case, even if you're not kind of able to put your finger on what that is exactly, this full moon it's a turning point, it's an ending, it's an emotional catharsis, it's a release, it's a bearing of fruit, it's a leveling up. All those full moon words in the area of life that has to do with you. So first house speaks to you, your soul's embodiment in this life. So it's about your physical body. It can speak to health. It can speak to your appearance, your personality. It's how you approach the world, how the world perceives you. The first house is kind of, related to how we are moving through life, how we steer our ship through life. And so when something happens in the first house, it can impact all areas of life because it's really about us and all that encompasses. So there is something going on here that's a major turning point or release or ending or culmination, for you. This can take so many forms, it's hard to give examples. It could be a major chapter closing in your life. It could be, and this could be in terms of relationship, because this is sitting on the relationship axis. So the moon is in your first house, but the sun is across the sky in the seventh house of the other, right? This is the axis of relationship. And so there may be something relational going on for you, a turning point in a relationship, a culmination, an ending, a leveling up, and all of those things that we spoke about. That's transpiring right now. And when I say relationship, like, think of this as, yes, it could be you and a significant other, but it could be you just in relation to others in general, or people that are important in your life or significant in some way. Like even things like, folks like business associates or partners, rivals even. something around contracts and agreements could be playing out here. So there could be something like that going on. It could be a turning point or a culmination in something surrounding your physical self, like your appearance, your approach, to how people kind of view you and see you, how you approach things. It could be that an old way of being is kind of coming to a close in some way, even. The old you is, there's something about that's kind of being released or falling away or potentially blossoming, something like that. So definitely listen, to the intro, Sag, because I also spoke about how there could be some tricky business with Neptune going on, but then some support from Saturn as well. So definitely don't miss that. And we will leave that there and move along to Scorpio now. Scorpio, for you, the full moon is culminating in your second house. So there is some sort of aha moment. I don't know, that just came to mind. An aha moment or a release or a culmination or bearing of fruit, a blossoming that is transpiring in your second house of your personal resources, your money, your time, your energy, right? So it could be things around finances and the money you make from your job or your skills and talents. It's how you get your basic needs met. It is how you sort of, when I say how you get your basic needs met, I mean, that can involve things like, our food, the food we eat, or the, how we nurture ourselves in that way, how we get our needs met in that way. It is what we put value on, and our own sense of self-worth is second house as well. So there's something going on here. There's been a larger story at play that the eclipses of 2020 to the end of 2020, early 22 spoke to. And now we're having this full moon that is wrapping up that story, like in the sense that there was a new moon, which was an eclipse back in December of 2021. And now this is the culmination of that, right? So something coming to pass here. And it could be like issues around, the money you make that are reaching a crescendo, or there's a payoff of some description, or that could be an old way of making money, could be on its way out, or an old way of like dealing with finances, even stories around money, like philosophies around money, ideologies around that. When I think of Sagittarius, it could be even some quest you've been on in terms of finances, in terms of self-worth, that sort of thing, in terms of what you value, that is now reaching this point of, where there's going to be some closure, or some, you're getting the rewards from the hard work, those sorts of things. And that just reminds me of, if you listen to the intro, and you'll hear about, how Saturn is being helpful in this lunation, and how Neptune may be being a bit tricky, right? So don't skip that piece. But this particular lunation is happening. So in the second house is the full moon, but the sun is across the sky in the 8th house of other people's resources. So again, it brings this sense of like, there's a connection to resources here, definitely. Your resources versus other people's resources. Oftentimes we think about this as money, but it can be time and energy as well. The 8th house is sort of how we are entangled with other people, whereas the second house is kind of how we are getting our needs met by our own accord, sort of thing. So there is something going on here where there may be, I think of things like there can be debts being paid off. There can be, or some kind of new financial arrangement being, maybe not new financial arrangement, but a turning point in a financial arrangement or situation. Some kind of a release, some kind of a payout, or some kind of an investment paying off. There's a lot of different ways, as always, to look at this, but those are themes. That axis of resources, your resources versus other people's resources. And also this axis is like the material world, which is the second house. So the world of form, shall we say. And then the 8th house is the transformation of that, sort of like the alchemizing of that, right? So there's something going on regarding those themes for you. Okay, so Scorpio, I think that's enough to go on. I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to move on to Libra now, where Libra, for you, we have this full moon happening in your 3rd house. So it's a full moon moment, a point of catharsis, release, blossoming, something coming to fruition, revolving around themes like siblings, cousins, neighbors, peers, community members, teammates, those folks that are kind of on an equal playing field, shall we say. But it's also about, beyond that, the 3rd house is a very busy place. It's about kind of like the things you do on the day-to-day, like the constant busyness that goes on the day-to-day. So this can be communications of any description, and things surrounding communications, even the tools of communication, short distance travel. You think of things like commutes or short trips can be in the 3rd house, exchanges of any kind, commerce, marketing, learning, teaching. Usually we're talking about things like early years, like even daycare, nursery school, kindergarten, elementary school, high school, or learning the basics of something, right? Writing, speaking, those sorts of communications as well. So all of that falls into the 3rd house. And it is a full moon moment that's happening there. Harkening back to that eclipse story on the Gemini Sagittarius axis, where we had the new moon, the last lunation of that previous eclipse cycle happened in December 2021, where we had a new moon eclipse. So whatever that was about, there's something connected to that here. And it's reaching a turning point, like I said. And then, of course, you've got Neptune in Pisces in a bit of a tricky spot, but also Saturn more helpful at the time of this full moon, right? And we spoke about all those pieces in the intro. So that's the full moon, but across the sky, we've got the sun in Gemini. So this full moon is on an axis, right? And it's the 3rd, 9th house axis, which is the axis of communication and the mind. So in the 9th house, that is sort of higher learning. It could be higher education. It could be travel, long distance travel, people in places far away from you. It could be things like your ideologies, politics, belief systems, religion, philosophy. I don't know if I said that. So justice. These are 9th house themes, right? So there's something going on here on that axis of the mind and communication that is reaching a full moon moment at this June 14th, full moon in Sagittarius. So hopefully, let me just think if I can give you an example. It could be something going on in the life of a sibling. It could be something going on in relation to travel, where you may have been planning something and now that's coming to pass, or something in relation to those plans is coming to pass. It could be some kind of educational theme that's playing out for you. Like it's the time of year now where people are graduating and moving on to, to other educational pursuits, or going off into the world to explore, or whatever it is that they're doing, when school ends. So those kinds of themes could be prominent right now. Could be something going on around that. And something going on around, communications in general as well. So, okay. I think that's good for you, Libra. I'm going to move on to Virgo, where Virgo, for you, the full moon is culminating in your 4th house. So there's something reaching a turning point, a catharsis, an illumination, a release, an ending, all those full moon things that revolves around home, family, roots, ancestry, place of living, real estate, your sense of emotional security, these sorts of things. And it's something that has been related to whatever the eclipse story in Gemini Sagittarius was about for you from 2020 right to sort of the beginning of 2022. And we had a new moon, like I said, in in December of 2021, which was an eclipse. And so if you think back to like what kind of things were going on then, there is this release point going on now. This, again, the full moon moment happening at this point in time. That is the final kind of chapter in that story. And for you, there's something revolving around those 4th house themes, like I mentioned here, that's reaching this culmination point. And there's Neptune for you sitting in Pisces that can be causing a little bit of confusion, illusion, deception, all those things. I spoke about all this in the intro, so don't skip that. But then there's Saturn lending you a hand somehow, and doling out the rewards for your hard work at the time of this full moon as well. And that's from the Sagittarius house, right? But this eclipse, I keep wanting to say eclipse because we've been talking about eclipses for the last little while. But this full moon, right? So it is in your 4th house, but then you've got the sun across the sky in your 10th house. So there's something going on this axis in general, which is the axis of your personal life, 4th house, versus your public life, which is 10th house. Home, 4th house. Career, 10th house. Emotional security, 4th house. Financial, material security, 10th house. And this is also the axis of parenting. So something could be going on, regarding parents and that sort of thing, or parenting in general, that's reaching this full moon moment at the time, of June, around the June 14th full moon in Sagittarius. So think about what's going on for you. I mean, I'm a Virgo rising. I can certainly tell you what this is about in my own life. It's pretty obvious for me. So, and that's a mutable sign, right? And I did mention to you that the mutable signs are kind of feeling this more perhaps than other people. So if you're a Virgo rising, you may be getting a good sense of what this is about. And you may be able to connect it more easily to those eclipses in Gemini Sag that were going on. You can think about that. Just to give you a couple of examples, like what could be manifesting or culminating in the 4th house, a change in your living situation in some way, some kind of a real estate situation, some sort of a shift or a release in your sense of emotional security, something being illuminated around ancestry, around parents, or something coming to a close there, winding down, maybe a parent has been going through something, or something like that. There's many different ways this could play out, but those give you some ideas on how this could be manifesting for you. So that's for you, Virgo. I will leave that for you, and I'll move on to Leo now, where Leo, this full moon is illuminating your 5th house. So, excuse me. It is a hot one out there today. So full moon moment in your 5th house of your creative pursuits, of children in your life, right? Your own children or children that you're somehow connected to or associated with. So things going on in the lives of your kids, issues around even like pregnancy and that sort of thing. How you have fun in life, what brings you pleasure and joy, you know, the things you create. I think I mentioned that already. Fifth house can be about, on the topic of like what brings us joy. This can be things like our hobbies, our special interests, even sports activities, that kind of thing as well. But there's a full moon moment happening here. And this is something that is related to the last eclipse on the Gemini Sag axis, which was a new moon eclipse in Sagittarius on December 3rd of 2021. So think about like, what was that eclipse story about for you, and how are things now reaching this crescendo? And maybe this is kind of like, it's feeling like it's like the last hurdle or the last piece in this story, right? We're kind of at the epilogue or the last chapter right now. And something being released here. So, and it's related to, because the sun is across the sky in the 11th house, it's on this axis of fifth house is all those themes I just mentioned. So it's kind of like your individual, how you individually shine your light in the world, or your creations or your children, versus the group, right? So other people, like your friends, associations, networks, it can be online communities even. It can be friendships that your children have as well. So your kids' friends can fall into the 11th house. It can be your benefactors and allies and the people that can support you and your individual contributions, kind of thing, and support your vision for the future, right? So that's the axis that this full moon is playing out on. And then we've got Neptune in Pisces being a bit of a, a tight spot or tricky place right now. Some tricky themes are being a bit difficult during this full moon. I spoke about that in the intro, but I also spoke about how Saturn is actually supporting right now. So, supporting what's going on, and that's from the Aquarius area of your chart. So you can look to those two pieces for added info. But this could be, just to give you some examples, there could be something that's been going on in the life of your kids, or as it relates to your kids or kids in general that you're associated with, that's reaching now a turning point, a crescendo, a release, a catharsis, whatever the full moon word you want to use is. That could be coming to pass. And it could be involving somehow you versus the group, or your kids versus, friends in some way, your creative individual contributions, and the people out there who can recognize and support and be allies, right? So these sorts of themes, it's how you have fun in life, and how you what brings you pleasure. And then that may be related somehow to a group or friends or networks or that kind of thing as well. So something going on there in your life, Leo, as a Leo rising. So, or Leo sun or moon, if that's what you're listening for. So think about those themes and how they are playing out for you, and what that means in your life, and in relation to that, those Gemini Sag eclipses, right, that had happened from the beginning of 2020. So, okay, I think that's good to go on, Leo. I'm going to move on to Cancer now, where Cancer for you have the full moon happening in your 6th house. So there is some sort of culmination, catharsis, release, ending, closure, turning point, leveling up, any full moon word you choose, that is transpiring in relation to issues around health and wellness, right? Health and illness, 6th house. This is the axis of sort of order, which is the 6th house, and chaos, which is the 12th house. It is the axis of health and wellness in many ways, because it speaks to our our physical health, and our mental and emotional and spiritual health. It is about how we are in service. It's about the hard work that we do on the day-to-day, the hard, sometimes thankless work it could be through your actual work that you are paid for, or it could be work that you're not paid for. The sixth house can feel like strife, and really like working for not a lot of reward. It can be, there can be hardships and challenges and these sorts of things going on when we're talking about the sixth house. It can be how you are in service in some way. It's about your daily grind and, checking off the ticky boxes on the day-to-day kind of thing. So there's a full moon moment happening here around any of those themes that I just spoke to. It's related to the Gemini Sagittarius eclipse cycle. But if you think back to the Sag New Moon that happened, which was an eclipse, December 2021, and this is a turning point as it relates to that. It's again a release, a catharsis, a culmination, and it also draws in 12th house themes again, this can be related to issues around mental, emotional, spiritual health. 12th house is endings. It is our blind spots, secrets, or things that are like we were unaware of. Things that were in the dark, in our unconscious, things that are related to our self-sabotaging behaviors. Sometimes we talk about addictions in the 12th house. The 12th house can be literally like places tucked away from the world, hospitals, hospices, spiritual retreat centers, detention facilities, rehab facilities, but even places like retreats, like how we take a vacation, how we or where we take a vacation, how we retreat from the world, spending more time in solitude, these sorts of things, right? It's complex. So these themes are all somehow at play at the time of this full moon in Sagittarius, but whatever the manifestation of this is in the sixth house, right? That I spoke about. And so it's this release point there of this story. And again, if you think about what I talked about in the intro, that Neptune is there in Pisces, causing a little bit of like confusion, wooziness is a good Neptune word, illusion, deception. You just definitely listen to the intro because I covered this. But then you've also got Saturn sitting in Aquarius, helping and supporting and bringing rewards for the hard work and the strife and all of that. So, that's something to also consider. I think that is, so okay, let me just give you a couple of examples before I sign off for you, Cancer. I'm noticing the light is changing so much here. 1 minute I'm washed out and 1 minute I'm in the dark. Anyway, so Cancer, this could be like some health crisis that's gone on that is reaching now a point of maybe there's a diagnosis, or maybe there's like a healing crisis, a healing moment, some answers going on about that, coming out the other side in some way, or something related to your job and the daily work that you do is reaching a full moon moment. Something related to hard work and challenges that you've had to face, your kind of daily slog or daily grind, is somehow reaching this, something's manifesting there, reaching an ending or a culmination or a blossoming in some way. So those are some things to consider for you, Cancer. And I'm going to move on to Gemini now. So Gemini, for you, you've got the full moon happening in your 7th house, opposite the sun in your 1st house. This is the axis of relationships. So, and you also have Mercury which is your ruler, just moved into your sign, right? So, which is a strong place for Mercury. And we spoke about this in the intro, among other things. But the full moon itself is culminating in your 7th house of relationship, of one-to-one relationship. So it's like, it can be significant other, it can be marriage partner. or significant other in some way. It can be just people that you have a close connection to, friends, family members, business associates, business partners. It can have to do with rivals even. It can have to do with contracts and agreements in the 7th house as well. And there's something reaching a turning point, some closure, some manifestation of something there in the 7th house, something coming to fruition, right? An emotional catharsis of sorts even. And this is related to the Sagittarius new moon. Like, it's related to the new moon 2 weeks ago, whatever transpired there, but also it's related to the Sagittarius new moon. And that new moon 2 weeks ago was in your sign. So this may be more significant for you than for some others. But also the Sagittarius new moon, that was an eclipse that was back in December of 2021. Something related to that storyline as well, or where there's like a coming to closure point here at the time of the full moon. And so you also should keep in mind that you've got Neptune in Pisces, maybe being a little bit nebulous, confusing. I spoke about that in greater detail in the intro. And then you've also got Saturn sitting there in Aquarius, who is actually supporting us all during this full moon. And so, you can think about, where's Aquarius in your chart? What are those themes that could be supporting right now? And so I'm thinking about things like, there is some kind of turning point in a relationship for you, an important relationship. There is some sort of closure or some kind of an emotional catharsis, or some sort of full moons can even be kind of like a leveling up in a relationship. It could be something coming to light in a relationship, being illuminated, so, or it could also be, I don't want to forget to say this, when we're talking about the 7th house, this could be more about it's your partner, something going on in the life of your partner or significant somebody in your life. It's whatever's playing out is playing out more for them than it is for you, but it impacts you because they're a close person in your life, right? So sometimes we see that as well, but it's kind of about you and the other, this full moon moment, because it's on the relationship axis. So consider that, what that means for you. Okay, so Gemini, I think that's good. And I'm going to move on to Taurus now. Taurus, for you, you have the full moon happening in your 8th house. So there is a crescendo. There is a turning point as it relates to 8th house themes of other people's resources. In general, this lunation is on the axis of other people's resources, which is the 8th house, versus your resources, which is the 2nd house, because that's where Gemini is and that's where the sun is at the time of this full moon. So, and this can also be the axis of like material form versus the transformation of material form in some way. But the full moon itself is illuminating the 8th house, right? So that's other people's resources. Something's manifesting here, coming to pass as it relates to not only like the new moon 2 weeks ago in Gemini, but it bigger picture speaking, it's the new moon eclipse that happened in Sagittarius, December 2021, and that whole eclipse story in general, like I was talking about in the intro. So something manifesting here, and it's all about somehow your connection to other people's resources. So other people's time, money, energy, which can be things like, practically speaking, we're talking about loans, debts, inheritance, scholarships, bursaries, taxes, insurance, those sorts of themes we tend to see in the 8th house. It can also be about your intimate entanglements with others, right? And all that entails. So the 8th house is a place where we can often feel like we don't have a lot of control over what happens there. And so it requires our surrender in some way, and our ability to rise up you know, after some sort of difficulty or that kind of thing. So there can be something going on and manifesting and culminating in that sense for you. And like I said, it's generally related to this axis of resources. But there's also the piece about Neptune and Pisces being perhaps a bit illusory or somewhat challenging, right, at the time of this full moon. But Saturn being more of a helper in this case. And I spoke about those pieces in the intro. And so it would be good for you to listen to that so you get the full picture. But just to leave you with a couple of perhaps real life examples to chew on. This could be something like debt repayment, like there's a debt being paid off or called in some way. Something culminating in relation to like an insurance situation that's been going on, or a tax situation that's been going on. It could be something about an intimate relationship or some level of intimacy, and that can be psychological intimacy, as well, or some entanglement is reaching a cathartic point. There could be something that has felt sort of out of your control is now, again, it's reaching an ending or a turning point at this time as well. So those are some things to consider for you, Taurus. And I'm going to move on to Aries now. So for Aries rising, Aries sun and moon, you've got the full moon culminating in your 9th house, Aries. So, this is like there was a new moon in Gemini on the same axis a couple of weeks ago. So there could be something that's culminating in relation to that. But bigger picture, we're talking about something related to the Gemini-Sag eclipse cycle that went on from 2020 to, the beginning of 2022 sort of thing. And that we had that, the last eclipse in that cycle was a new moon in Sagittarius in December 2021. So if you think back about like what was going on then and how does it feel like there's some kind of wrapping up to that story happening now, it's very likely related to that. But it's manifesting specifically in your 9th house of your philosophy, your worldview, your belief system, foreign people and places, and, teaching, learning, higher learning, what you can learn from other people who are different from you, higher education in some way, publishing, justice. These are all 9th house themes that we can, some kind of quest, that you've been on. So there's something transpiring there. And it's also connected to the 3rd house because this full moon is on an axis. The sun is in the 3rd house across the sky. So the axis of the mind and communications, right? So this may be drawing in themes of communication, of thoughts, ideas, perceptions, ideologies. And again, like I said, travel, learning, those sorts of things. People in places far away versus close to home kind of thing. We've also we have to remember, sorry, I just lost my train of thought for a brief second. We have to remember that Neptune is in Pisces at the time of this lunation. And I spoke about this piece in the intro. And Neptune is like, it's causing a bit of fogginess and confusion and maybe some like a tight spot to kind of wiggle our way out of at the time of this full moon. But the good news is that Saturn is supporting, right? Saturn in, excuse me, I'm sticking to the chair. Saturn is supporting us here at this lunation via trine and sextile to the sun and the moon. And so that piece is important to consider, that support from the Saturn and Aquarius area of your chart. So it's a good thing to look at. To give you some specific examples, this may be some kind of like a shift in your perception or your philosophy. is happening. It could be something related to travel that is manifesting. It could be something related to teaching and learning, like I don't know, when I think about this, I think about like some sort of like maybe graduating from the basics, moving on to, or graduating high school, moving to college or university, something like that, or some trip you've been planning on, right, is now manifesting. Something related to a foreign place, or something that's like on the horizon in some way is manifesting now. So those are some things that I can. Something even involving like politics or justice could be reaching a culmination point right now as well, Aries. Okay, so that's for you, Aries, and I'm going to move to Pisces now, where Pisces, for you, we have the full moon culminating in your 10th house. So there is a full moon moment happening in relation to your public life, your career, your sense of authority in the world, the legacy you wish to leave, issues even around authority figures or parents, or perhaps the parent that was more of the authority, but parenting in some way. There could be something something more public that is being illuminated for you, that's coming to a close and ending, catharsis, reaching this crescendo again, or involving your career, or one of those things that I was talking about, a legacy project of some description. And this is also involving the 4th house, because that's where the sun is sitting, right? So it's this axis of the 10th and the 4th house. Full moon itself is culminating in the 10th, but it also, there's an interplay there with the 4th house of home, family, roots, ancestry, again, in parenting, real estate, emotional security versus material security, which is the more the 10th house, right? So there's something going on there. It's a full moon moment that is directly related to, in some ways, the new moon that happened in Gemini 2 weeks ago, but also the new moon that was the ending of the Gemini-Sag eclipse cycle. It was a new moon eclipse in Sagittarius in December 2021. And so this is kind of like that last kind of piece of the story, of that eclipse story that we're seeing here, where we can soon close the book on that kind of thing. And so if you think about what was going on for you during those eclipses, and you can get a sense of how that relates, right, Pisces? And you are a mutable sign. And as I was saying in the intro, this can be more prominent for you as a mutable sign. And we also have to remember Neptune is in your sign. And that's in the intro. If you listen to the intro, you'll know that I was talking about Neptune being a bit of a challenge at the time of this lunation, because we've got this sense of confusion or nebulousness or fogginess or something along those lines. Listen to the intro. I said more there. Coming from Neptune in your sign in Pisces. But then we've got some support from Saturn, in Aquarius. Because Saturn is in trine and sextile to this full moon. So that's some good news, right? So if you know where Aquarius sits in your chart, that's where kind of the support is coming from for you. But the full moon itself is culminating in your 10th house. So there could be a turning point in career for you, or some sort of public acknowledgement or recognition, or something coming to pass, some ending, release in the life of a parent or an authority figure, or some kind of legacy moment, going on. Something related to material security in some way is reaching this crescendo. These sorts of things could be going on for you as a Pisces rising. Okay, so, or sun or moon as well, if you're listening for your sun or your moon sign. All right, Pisces, I'm going to leave that there. I'm going to move on to Aquarius now, where Aquarius, this full moon, is happening in your 11th house. So you have a full moon moment, a release, an ending, a culmination, an illumination, a blossoming in your 11th house of the group, friends, supporters, and allies, perhaps your children's friends, if that applies to you. Some sort of like your hopes and dreams for the future, something as it relates to that. There is this crescendo here, right? Being reached at the full moon, something manifesting there. And this is related not only to the new moon in Gemini that happened 2 weeks ago, but if you think back to the eclipse cycle in on the Gemini Sagittarius axis that we were talking about in the intro, we had a new moon eclipse in December of 2021 in Sagittarius. And so think back, like, what was that about for you? What was happening? This is the point where we're kind of getting to now, like, we're closing the book on that story, right? And so what's that about for you? What's that been about for you? And it can be related in some way, in this case, too, to the 5th house, because the sun is in the 5th house in Gemini, and that's across the sky from the 11th house. So we've got this axis, right, of, like I was saying, 11th house, the group, versus 5th house, the individual. And that's, the 5th house is your, it could be your children or children you're associated with. It could be how you have fun in life, what brings you pleasure and joy, your creative pursuits, and somehow as that relates to the 11th house themes. So, and then you've got Neptune in Pisces, which can be at the time of this full moon a bit tricky, right? We talked about that in the intro, so you can get further insight by listening to that. And also Saturn in your sign, that is actually being helpful at the time of this full moon. So supporting whatever's going on at this full moon for you. Again, I spoke in greater detail in the intro about that. But this sort of whatever's manifesting is doing so in your 11th house of, we just talked about that, the group, among other things. But so this could look like, let's give you some examples. Something, there's a full moon moment, a blossoming, a release around your allies and supporters. So it could be like some form of support you were getting is now, that's waning, or there's like an illumination of that in some way, or something in the life of a friend is being illuminated, or there's some kind of a leveling up or a closure there. There could be, if this pertains to you, something going on in in relation to your children's friends. There's some sort of ending point there, closing. Maybe somebody's moving away. Maybe there's a turning point in the life of a friend, like somebody's having a baby, getting married, or again, like I was talking about, allies and supporters, or something is coming to pass in relation to like your vision for the future and your hopes and dreams for the future. There may be something being released there, a cathartic moment, a time of manifestation of something along those lines. So I think that's enough to go on for you, Aquarius. I did remind you of the Saturn and Neptune piece as well. So I'm going to leave that there for you. And I'm going to move on to, last but not least, in this case, we've got Capricorn. So Capricorn, this is a full moon in your 12th house. Now, this full moon is an illumination, a turning point, a catharsis, a release, something manifesting that got off the ground in some ways at the Gemini New Moon a couple of weeks ago, around June 2nd. But in the bigger picture, we're talking about the Gemini Sagittarius eclipse cycle that happened from 2020 through to the end of 2021 or early 2022. Now, as it specifically relates to, there was a new moon eclipse in December 2021 in the Sagittarius area of your chart, right? And so now we're at the full moon moment of that. So what is going on in your life that's associated in some way with that and with that eclipse story in general? We're kind of now at this point where we're I've used the phrase like we're closing the book on that right? And then a new story will begin in some way. And so there's something manifesting coming to pass here. And it has to do with, in your case, with 12th house themes of, this is the axis in general. Let me just take a step back first before I dive into what I was going to say. This is the axis of health and wellness, right? Because you've got the sun in the 6th house across the sky from the 12th house at the time of this full moon. So this is the axis of health and wellness. We're talking about physical, mental, emotional, spiritual health. We're talking about your daily grind and the escape from that daily grind, however that may happen, how you are in service. So specifically, the manifestation is in the 12th house. And so this is about things that were in the dark that can be coming to light now. Things you were unaware of, blind spots, secrets, things that were hidden, even your subconscious. These can be like, sometimes we look at the 12th house and we think about things that are self-sabotaging behaviors, even like addictions for some people. That's not for everyone, obviously, but it can be about how you escape the daily routine, whether that's because you choose to, so doing things like a retreat or a vacation or something like along those lines, or because, the universe has chosen that for you at this particular moment in time. So that can be things like, there's an illness or something along those lines to deal with, or you're spending time in places like hospitals, that sort of thing. This can do with like rehab facilities, detention centers, anything like that can play a role here. Sort of like the ends of like stories coming to an end in some way is the 12th house. So those are all, this can even be about like your spiritual life, your dream life, those kinds of things too can be 12th house related. But it's this like, it's where we are. The 12th house is, it's the last house. So it's kind of like, it's that place, like wherever if you think of it this way, wherever our soul is before it manifests into this physical incarnation, before it is embodied in the first house, right? So it's like a resting place almost. That's the 12th house. So there's something going on here for you as it relates to that, Capricorn. And, it can be about any of those themes that I mentioned. The 12th house is quite complex. So you can think about, what does that mean in my own life? What story is playing out here? And where is this chapter now kind of, gradually coming to a close? But keep in mind, in the intro, I spoke to the fact that Neptune in Pisces can be a little bit, could be causing a little bit of confusion and just, it can be a bit of a tricky spot to work through during the full moon. But also Saturn, which is your ruler, Saturn rules Capricorn, is being quite helpful at this full moon, right? Saturn in Aquarius is in trine and sextile to the full moon. And I spoke to the details of that in the intro. So you're going to want to hear that. All right. So that is all. I think that's enough to go on, Capricorn. And that's the horoscope for all 12 signs. I hope that you enjoyed this and you got something out of it. And if you did, I would super appreciate it if you hit the like button, if you subscribed. Also, if you're feeling so inclined, you can buy me a coffee kind of thing at the PayPal link below, make a donation. And that's, helps me to keep being able to spend my time every week doing these videos for you. So I really appreciate you being here. Be well, take good care, and I will catch you again in the next video. Bye for now.